Thank you for those of you who are joining us live on this beautiful summer morning. Although I'm here in Prince Edward County, I was staying on vacation with my family and it's a little cooler. My kids are at the beach because they don't seem to care whether it's warm or cold. And I'm in a co-working space doing this call here, which I think is really appropriate as we talk about this idea of the mental load and how do we navigate both parenthood and careers as ambitious, high achieving parents. So I have Ashley Chang with me here today, which I'm really excited to have her with us. I'm going to tell you a bit about myself. I'm going to have Ashley introduce herself, and then we're going to have just a discussion around this mental load. And please feel free to ask questions in the chat. I will be watching out for them, and we'll also have an open Q&A at the end if you haven't had your questions answered. So you are in the right place if you are here for the workshop on the mental load, how ambitious parents can lead, thrive, and still breathe. And as I mentioned, I'm here with Ashley Chang. I am your host, Jenn Abbatiello, and I'll tell you a bit about myself in a minute. Many of you probably know me, but those who don't, I prided myself on being a high achiever and perfectionist my entire career. And then I became a parent, and it really brought me to my knees. And it was the hardest job I have ever done. And that led me to supporting other high achieving parents to find a way to show up that feels good for them, to be, calm and connected to their children while also navigating demanding careers. And how do we kind of show up in both worlds feeling like our best selves? So here is some of the training that I've done along the way, but I always say a lot of it I've come through my own lived experience and figuring out what works and what doesn't work and supporting other parents along their journeys. So that's a bit about me. And now I'll pass it over to Ashley to share a bit about her before we dive in.
Thanks so much, Jen. I'm so excited to be here. So I'm Ashley. I am co-founder and CEO of Sundays, which is an executive assistant service for working parents. Our goal is to help more parents have meaningful careers and the family lives that they want. And we'll get a little bit more into what Sundays is, I think, over time. But before starting Sundays, I spent a decade in early stage tech companies, from being the first employee to working at a bigger company that I helped scale their venture capital business line from 10 to 100 million. So lots of different experiences in the working world. And then as I was there, saw how difficult it was for many of the smartest people I know as they had families and tried to balance work and family, and what that did to kind of both their career and family lives. So that's how we got to the problem that Sundays is trying to solve. And then um, I will get into the story behind it in a little bit. But personally, I live just outside of San Francisco, and I have a 5-month-old baby boy.
Thank you, Ashley, for taking the time to join us here today. I'm so excited to have you because, like I said, this idea of this mental load, and we're trying to do so much more as parents than any generation prior to us. So it makes sense that it's hard, but I really wanted to bring you in because you have a lot of your own experience of figuring out how to navigate this that I think that we can all learn from. But before we dive into that, I was wondering if you'd be able to take a moment to share like what made you realize that things had to change? Like what was like the driving reason why you pivoted to found Sundays?
Yeah. Um, so as I mentioned, a lot of it came from my experience working in the tech industry. I have been in tech for about 10 years. I didn't have kids yet, but I always knew that I wanted to have both a career and a family. And I saw, I was in product management, so kind of on the technical side. There were not a lot of women in that area to begin with, but as I got older and more people started to go into the stage of life where they were having kids, I saw that. Even the ones that were there started to drop out or started to ask for less at work because it was so challenging to balance both family and work. And then when I started to look at my own history, I also was really motivated by my mom. She was a computer scientist in the 80s in the same tech industry. And when she had us, she felt like she really had to choose between family and work because there wasn't an opportunity to balance both and there was very little support. And I just thought it was so ironic that like the tech has moved so quickly in the last 30 years and everything on my desk today was probably created in the last 30 years, but we've made so such little change in how we support, especially moms in balancing family and work. And so I wanted to try to solve that problem and make it possible for myself, but also for all of these other amazing parents that I saw were really struggling.
I think you're so right in the idea that so much has changed, yet in terms of how we support parents in the workforce, very little has changed from a systemic perspective to enable both parents to be in the workforce, right? Like if we think about the workforce, many started as, a single working parent, usually the dad, the male, and the woman was at home caring for the child, and then enter, the shift where there's more women in the workforce than there ever has been, in dual income owners and multi-passionate people, but yet there hasn't been systemic changes in order to support these two income working parents and childcare. Because let's be honest, it takes a village. We always talk about this village, and I'm like, I know as a working parent, I had no village, and so we can talk a bit more about that as we get into it. But what we did in order to allow for us to be able to have these careers, but it's like a lot hasn't changed to support parents to have this family and continue on in their careers. So I think that is something that to be mindful of. There hasn't been systemic changes in the workforce.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, at least at the companies I worked at, the type of work that was rewarded was kind of this like on-call work where if you are the first person to answer a message or to be online late and things like that are what led to people getting promoted and getting recognized for doing good work and not necessarily the quality of their overall work and kind of delivering on meeting goals and things like that. And so I think it's really interesting because a lot of times visibility at work is what leads to what we think success at work is. And that isn't always compatible with, or it isn't compatible with having a family life too, because someone needs to be on call for their kids. And they just, if you also just want to be present with your kids when you're outside of work too.
Yeah, you touch on this idea of we're not in many organizations are not in a meritocracy where we look at, what does success look like in terms of results. A lot of times it is this visibility on who is the most visible, most present. And that person, I'll be honest, I've worked in environments where might be the least productive person there or least innovative person there, but yet they're seen. And oftentimes that is equated to what success looks like. So I think that's a good point. From your perspective, what does the mental load actually look like and feel like in your life? And how do you know when it's too much? This idea of we're so used to culturally just doing and taking on more. And I find many of us are in a generation where it's hard to say no. We're like, I can't say no. So how do you know like this mental load when it's too much?
Yeah, I think that's such a good question. And it's something I'm constantly learning myself, especially since I am just kind of reaching this working parenthood part myself. And even sometimes before that, the mental load is too high of like business things. But for me, I feel like I know that it's too much when I'm like, I can't focus because there are too many things in my mind. I have like 16 things that I'm trying to do at the same time, and I can see myself like hopping between all of them. And then that leads to this kind of spiral where I feel like I'm not getting any of those things done. And it just feels like a pile of things kind of on top of me. And that's similar to what I've heard from a lot of the parents that I talk to too, is just you're starting to feel kind of like buried underneath all of the things that you have going on. And I have some ways that I try to work through that, but that's at least what the feeling feels like to me, Jen.
So for you, and I'm curious if there's others on the call that we're willing to share, like for you, it sounds like when you can't focus, like there's a lot of things coming, you're like, what do I do first? And I can definitely relate to that. And I wonder if there's other people who'd be willing to share. When do they notice when they're at this tipping point where you're like, and sometimes we go past the tipping point to only realize where I know for me, sometimes I've gone past the tipping point and I'm in this state of burnout, but not even aware, like it's high functioning anxiety, I call it, where I'm still doing, but I'm pretty fatigued. I'm feeling like I need a lot more sleep and rest than I would typically. And sometimes we ignore those signs. And I'm curious if others are willing to share, like, what are signs where they notice that maybe there is too much on their plate. Another one in parenthood that is familiar with me and a lot of the parents I work with is you might snap at your kids for when you reflect on something that is a little deal, like we make it a big deal. And it's because our window of tolerance in those moments, because we've taken on so much, is smaller than it typically would be. And we might externally, like in the workplace, and this was me, like have this facade that we have it all together, but yet at home we crumble because it's this safe space where we're like, I'm done, I'm exhausted.
I think that's so relatable, Jen.
Yeah, and I used to feel a lot of shame in this idea of like at home I'd lose my shit. Sorry to be frank, and I was like, what's going on for me? And it is a lot because of being unable to ask for help or thinking like everyone else is doing all these things, and so I should be able to do it too. And how do we ask for help, and what kind of help is available, and what do I even get help with? So actually that brings me to, what does support actually look like from your experience when you are noticing that this mental load and all the things that you have swirling on your to-do list, what helped you ease that stress of juggling both career and parenting?
Yeah. Well, I think that what you just talked about, where you're actually in this state of burnout, I think that's the first thing where it's just taking a step back and getting out of that place. Because when you're acting from this state of being just like exhausted, it's really hard to make progress on um, anything here. So what I try to do first is just like make time for what brings me energy, which for myself is just like getting some quiet time on my own or going outside or trying to get some time to exercise. So trying to bring back like small things that individually bring me energy into my routine is really big. And then setting a goal of like, what am I going to do next to get out of this state repeatedly has been helpful. So that's usually the first step that I take. And then, yeah, Jen, did you have any thoughts on that piece?
Yeah, like something that I think is important to remember is that it could be something small. We sometimes think that this idea of self-care and reducing this mental load has to be something big. And what I hear you reflecting on is like, I just need maybe a moment to like step outside and go for a short walk. And it's those micro moments that I really want to emphasize can make a difference when we're feeling like we're at this breaking point. I would love us to get to a point where we don't reach the burnout and we have these earlier indicators and start to normalize getting help, so we're not getting to that depletion point. But yes, sometimes when we notice we're in that depletion point, starting with something small so that it feels attainable is like what I'm hearing you say, is start small but start.
Yeah. Yeah, that's usually the first step that I recommend. And then from there, I try to look at like what can I do to get organized. So like I think that um, for me, what's been really helpful is like there are a lot of things that it takes to keep a family running, but some of them I can make into like a system so that I do the same thing every single time versus having to think about it. And that like mental load of needing to remember every step can be really high. So when I have like for instance, for meal planning, I have like a process that, and I actually have a Sundays person who helps me with this, but I have a process that we run through every week, and it just kind of runs on autopilot so that I don't have to put in like the mental work of thinking of what do we want to eat next week, because even sometimes that or even like getting a grocery order in is sometimes just feels like this insurmountable hurdle, even though it's it shouldn't be a big problem because like it seems like such a small thing to do, but when you have so many other things going on, even these like small pieces can feel so overwhelming. So figuring out
And
that
even if
system,
you
yeah,
say, like, sorry to cut you off there, but when you think about, oh, doing groceries seems like a small thing, but in theory, it's not, because what goes into it is like, well, how do I know what groceries I need? And like you just says, like, it starts with a meal plan, right? And
yeah,
we know we have to eat every day, and like there's 3 meals that go into most of our days with snacks, whatever. But this idea of like, how do we deconstruct it is, if it's the groceries, but then what am I planning to eat so I know what the groceries are? Because once you have this meal plan, then it's much easier to say, okay, what do we have versus what we don't, and to apply like a system, like you said. And I'm a big believer in also involving my kids in helping create that meal plan, because they're more likely to eat it if they've contributed to
Yeah.
putting on what's on there, and even if they then help contribute to make it. But then making that meal plan visible to everyone, because then it reduces some of that mental load of, depending what age your child is at, like, what's for dinner? What's for dinner? It's like, I don't know, check the meal plan. So this idea of getting support to create a meal plan then dovetails in making some of the other steps that go into it easier. Does
Yeah.
that feel true?
Yes, totally. And
Mm.
then the other thing that I try to do is just have like a family knowledge base. So we use Notion for this, but like you were just saying, when you have the whole meal plan and it like lives in mom's head or something like that, that means everybody's asking you every day, what are we having for dinner? Which I know is a very triggering question for a lot of people. And so for what we recommended for everyone, to try to create like a place where you store all of that information. So like, who are the kids' doctors? Who are your doctors? When was the last time your dog went to the vet? That type of thing, so that it doesn't just live in your head or just live on your phone. It's somewhere where you and your partner and even older kids or anyone who's helping you could also access. So trying to get as much information out of your head as possible, and then setting up those systems that can run kind of automatically um, for you, as can help reduce kind of that high mental burden.
Like this, we think about it in the workplace, right? But we often don't apply some of the things that work in the workplace to home. So what I'm hearing you say is like this knowledge base, like just getting it out of your head and onto, in this case, Notion, which is a platform that helps organize all this stuff. Because then you can also clearly see all the things. And I remember my husband and I doing this because I, by default, used to take on an unfair share of the household
Yeah.
responsibilities, just as mothers do. And I know that's not the case ever, but it tends to be. But then when you don't write it down, you almost don't realize all the things you are actually doing. And when you start to write it down, it creates more visibility on what is getting done, which is also the first step in figuring out, well, who should be the owner of this? You know, is it me? Is it my partner? Or do I outsource it? So I think like the first step is getting all those things that are in your head out of your head and onto either a physical piece of paper or onto like a platform like Notion, so that you can start to clearly see all the things.
Yeah, totally. And a physical piece of paper works great too. I know a lot of people who
Mm.
just like write it down
Yeah.
and put it on their fridge and stuff like that. But yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. And as you were mentioning, also the sharing the work with your partner, I think these are all steps that I would recommend doing before you think about outsourcing, is creating that knowledge base, figuring out the systems that you already run for your family, figuring out how you want to divide work with your partner if you have a partner to divide work with. Are really powerful first steps. And I don't know if you're probably familiar with Fair Play, Jen, but it's a kind of a system of uh, a big list of all things it takes to keep a family running. And then they actually make them into like playing cards that you can distribute between you and your partner of who's going to own each thing in your household. And that could be getting it done yourself, or it could be outsourcing it to someone else. But what's really important about those, and I think really powerful, is full ownership. So it's kind of owning it from conceiving, planning, and executing, not just like the executing piece. Because I think a lot of times when we think about sharing work with partners, a lot of moms will kind of do all of the planning part, and then they'll be like, okay, can you take the dog to the vet? But they've already done all of the work to remember
Mm.
that the dog needs to go to the vet and call the vet and make sure it fits in with everyone's schedule. But giving that full ownership to someone else can be really meaningful.
We should be actually like, I am familiar with fair play, but I imagine a lot of people aren't. Maybe sure how many of you know what fair play is, or maybe it's helpful if you can just tell us a bit more about that idea, because I think it is a good one for people to think about using to help with that mental load.
Yeah. So Fair Play, it's a book and a card system, and the writer is a woman named Eve Rodsky, and I think in the book, she tells a story of how she was kind of in this place of burnout, basically, where she was like, okay, my husband went to sleep, I'm going to stay up for 2 more hours and do all of these tasks around the house to make sure it's prepared for the next day. And she was also working full time while her husband was working full time. And so she then was like, okay, this is not working for us. How can I like quantify what are the things that I'm doing? And so she first, I think, made a list of all the things she was doing, and then also had several of her friends who did similar things. And then they built out this really thorough list of all of the things it takes to keep a house running. And there's different categories. So if you don't own your home, you can kind of remove those things from your list. Or if you don't have a dog, you can remove all of those things. But you actually, I think it's 100 cards in total of all of these different home management pieces. And then the idea is that you can distribute these with your partner. So you take a card. One of them might be like um, house cleaning or something like making sure the house is clean. So then you would talk with your partner about what does it mean for us to have a clean house? Because everybody has kind of different standards for that. So set the standard of what good means, and then you choose who's going to own that card for, and you can redistribute kind of over time, but choose who's going to own that card. I think it's good to do it based off of who likes that activity more or who hates it less.
That might be
Um,
more the option, who hates it
yeah.
less.
But so you end up kind of distributing these cards, and the idea isn't necessarily that everyone has an equal stack of cards, but that it feels more equitable. And yeah, so and then at the end, you kind of divide these tasks, and so mom and dad or whatever your family unit looks like should have kind of have these ownership areas that they are in charge of in your home. And then you own them kind of from start to finish, like I was mentioning before. And then you kind of recheck in every so often to see how are those things going? Are we actually doing them?
Mm.
And see if you're actually then dividing labor a little bit more equally.
Yeah, I think there's like some key points here. One is like the visibility of all the tasks, which sometimes can feel in of itself like a hard task when it's all stored in our head. So like fair play, I think helps. And there's other ways to do this, right? Is on the transparency on what are all these moving pieces so that you can have these open conversations around it. But then also you brought up this point of that equitable isn't necessarily equal. And I think having those conversations on there might be seasons, and we're not all in a dual, two parent household, but like there might be seasons where one parent might be able to take on more, and another season where another parent might be able to take on more. And having those conversations on who has capacity and be flexible on what that looks like in different seasons, I think is an important one. Um, how does Sundays help with this? Because I know you offer support to be able to share some of this or figure out, maybe no one has capacity. What
Yeah.
do we do?
Yeah. So I did all this research I talked to over 1,000 parents at this point of how they were balancing family and work, and got to I came from a tech background. So at first I was like, we're going to build an app and it will solve this problem. But the more people I talked to, the more I realized there's just not enough time in the day, which is what you said. And so what we do is we have a team of executive assistants who are almost all moms. So they know what it takes to run a family and a household. And we pair the clients that we work with a person on our team. So they get to know you and your family. Um, and they become like your right hand person, and they understand. So if we were doing meal planning, they would get to know like who are your kids, how old are they, who likes broccoli, who doesn't like broccoli, what are kind of the intricacies that go into running your family life, and then they will help run some of these tasks. And ideally they take off as many things as possible, but we do a lot around kind of life maintenance stuff like making dentist appointments, making sure your car oil got changed, around seasonality, so getting ready for the holidays now, and then a lot also around kind of seasons of life. So when kids are going into elementary school, and what does it look like to make that transition? And so we've been helping hundreds of families with doing these things. And so we have ideas of like, what can we do for families in all of these different situations that will help reduce the mental load, and give them back some time for hopefully relaxing, getting space for yourself, and more quality time with your family where you aren't trying to do all of these things at once.
It also makes me think of, I don't know if you know the book by Dan Mortel, Buy Back Your Time. Have you heard of that one?
Yes, I
Yeah.
have.
Yeah. And it's this idea because sometimes we also feel that we should be doing all these things ourselves. And
Yeah.
sometimes it feels tricky. I was like, oh, I'm going to outsource this and I have to pay someone to do this. And like, does that make sense? And when I read the book of Buy Back Your Time, it really looks at like, what is your time worth? And what are pieces that you want to keep ownership of versus ones that, it makes more sense to outsource. And I think that sometimes even in of itself, we need to kind of challenge ourselves on why do I feel like I need to hold on to this responsibility? And I also want to be fully transparent, like we're living in a tough financial time. So some of us, feel like that is not an option, but what are ways that we potentially can? And help
Yeah.
me understand, like when we talked about, they can take on some of these pieces, do they also help in documenting all that stuff? Because that in of itself could feel like a lot too. It's like, it's all in my head. How do they help you get it out of your head?
Yeah, totally. So they will help you kind of build those systems that you can use repeatedly, whether it's an EI doing it or you doing it internally for your family. And usually, a lot of times, what we'll do is we'll just hop on a call like this and let people kind of brain dump all the things that it takes that they have on their mind today and talk through things. So it isn't necessarily taking that time to like be in work mode and documenting everything, but our team is really great at kind of asking you the questions that they need to know to do something well and then documenting that so that next time they do it for you, they'll do it exactly how you want. And next time you do it, you'll also do it the way that is faster and hits all of the things that you need.
And do some people just choose to get support on, again, creating the systems, but then they choose to own the systems, like we talked about in Notion, where it's like, okay, now you have this database of where are all the kids' documents and their pediatrician's info and the vet. And like, I know, for example, we're away on holiday now and we had someone sitting for us, and I have this document I keep reusing
Yeah.
that's like, here's about our cat and how you take care of our cat and things like that, that they help you create. And then people then choose whether they want to continue getting support, or now that there's more transparency around everything, it makes it feel easier. Is that
Yeah, so people go both ways. Sometimes they have kind of like we'll do the setup or we'll help tackle a big to-do list that they've been building up over a long time, and then they'll feel like they're in a better place. We're actually coming out with a new product that's like specifically designed around that, where it's like a 3-month kind of seasonal sprint where we try to tackle all of those things and then hand it back to you. And then if you come back in the future, we're also ready to help you again. But kind of get all of that setup done, tackle a lot of the backlog of the to-do list, and then give it back to you if it's not as busy of time. And then we have a lot of people who also want to work with us on an ongoing basis because it does let them kind of let go of a lot of that mental burden of remembering everything themselves. And especially over time, the EA gets to know you a lot better. And so it becomes a lot more natural. So, like for example, I have a person on our team who helps me, and I wanted to get my son a measles vaccine earlier, and so I was like, "Could you call the pediatrician and see if they can move up our appointment?" And she already knows who the pediatrician is and knows like all of the questions that they would ask about him and when our last appointment was and stuff like that. So she can really easily make that update for us, and it takes her like 5 minutes, and I got to get it off of my mind. So that kind of knowledge builds up over time. So the partnership is helpful over time as well, but we'll do both ways.
I heard you say this, get it off of my mind. And I feel like this is a key thing about when we think about mental load. The reason it's a load is because we're keeping it all in our head, right?
Yeah.
And it gets heavy. It gets heavy because there's so much swirling around, and then it gets overwhelming and we don't know where to start. And again, what I keep coming back to, and I want to keep reiterating, is this idea that we have more swirling in our head than we ever have before. And the first step that you started with is noticing that this overwhelm, and that maybe we feel like there's too much, and taking a moment to spend time in nature, to go for a walk, to do whatever it is that helps fill your cup first and foremost. And then starting this process of getting it all out of your head and on physical or paper or whatever it is, just getting it out, because that decreases the load when we stop holding it just in our heads and we get it out. And this getting it out also creates visibility on, whoa, look how much was in there.
Yeah.
And the getting it out helps the load feel lesser already. And I think
Yeah.
this feels so true for me. And I'm curious how this resonates with other people, that this idea that when we start to create more visibility into all those things, that in itself is like, oh yeah, it is a lot. Like when I work with parents, sometimes when I say like, think about all the things they're doing, and when they start to say it out loud and then they reflect, it's like, oh my God, yeah, that is a lot.
Yeah.
Right? When you say it out loud and then you're listening to yourself, it's like, oh my God, yeah, it is a lot. Is there anything else from your experience, both as a mother and someone who's passionate about their career, as well as having built some days? What else would you say you've learned along the way? Like we talked about this idea of taking a moment for yourself, this, emptying all the thoughts and figuring like what else do you find has been supportive for you or other people that you've supported?
Yeah. I think one thing that's been really helpful for me so far in parenthood, which you kind of just mentioned, was that it's just really hard for everyone. It is a lot of work. And I think having that perspective of like having talked to so many people who found it really hard, and are super smart, they know what they're doing, they're great. And just having that perspective that everyone finds it hard, a lot of people are struggling is really helpful. So you're not necessarily comparing yourself to like people who look like they have it all together on Instagram and stuff like that. But recognizing that this is what you're doing right now is really difficult has been really helpful. Um, so that's kind of the mindset part that I've been trying to keep reminding myself as I go through this process.
Yeah, this feels hard because it is hard, right? I think sometimes, like you said, when we start looking at Instagram or other people's posts, and let's be honest, oftentimes that's someone's highlight reel, and we don't see everything that went behind the scenes or all of that. And so comparisons, was that quote, comparisons to thief of joy. So
Yeah.
remembering to tune into ourselves and that this is hard because it is hard. So normalizing that. And I see, yeah, Ryan's points like that technology, and I'm the first to admit, like with my kids, I'm always mindful of boundaries on screen time and tech, but there is tech for good, right?
Yeah.
AI can be used to help simplify some of these tasks. And Ryan was sharing how he creates reminders on his phone. There are ways to use technology to support us, even if we think about, meditation apps and things like that. Like there is a positive force for tech. It's not all negative, and it's more when we consciously choose how to use it versus it using us. So I think that's an important reminder. And I want to, before we close, I want to also ask anyone on this call, what is top of mind as we talk about this mental load for you? Like, what do you find hardest in your day to day, and what would maybe feel supportive? You can either come off mute or put it in the chat. Ryan, I love these shares on all the things that you find helpful. And I think we chatted about this before, this idea of also putting in your calendar this occasional date night. Like we sometimes, when we take on and become parents, in addition to the careers we've had, sometimes our relationship with our partner is on the back burner. And I see so many times where, parents then have teens or empty nesters, and they kind of like have lost who they were because they weren't spending that intentional time of continuing to nurture that relationship, not having to go to make supper or do anything because kids are actively fighting and want to be held. Yeah, and I think sometimes this slowing down to speed up, when our kids are having a hard time, sometimes we want them to just like get over it, and we sometimes try and stuff that down because we just want to keep moving forward. And this idea that we sometimes need to slow down to be with, that actually allows us to then speed up after we've taken that moment to slow down. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else want to share either something that works for them or something that they're finding hard or what resonated here? Michelle, I find it difficult to combat the exhaustion, wanting to fully be present at work and fully be present at home. By the time bedtime rolls around, I feel depleted. Yeah, I hear this, right? Like sometimes we also want to rush our kids into bed because we're so longing for that moment of rest for ourselves. And sometimes that window starts to close when our kids are resisting bedtime, right? Is that something that you can relate to as well? Or
Yeah, I mean, I think that um, I relate to this a lot. I feel like I have this like very specific schedule of like when I'm with the baby and when I'm at work and I'm back with the baby and I'm like, okay, he goes to sleep at this time. And then sometimes I'm like, I have to do more work after that. And so I end my days feeling like that was a very long day. And then I'm going into tomorrow. And um, yeah, sometimes I think that it's it just does feel exhausting. I don't necessarily have a solution yet, but I'm very cognizant of like how can I create a little bit of time for myself in that day. For me right now, it's been getting up earlier and trying to spend that time exercising or going outside. But um, there's kind of the cycle of how long the day is, and that gets harder to do sometimes. So I think being aware of like what are those things that give you a little bit of energy boost back for yourself is really powerful.
yeah, and I think this idea where there hasn't necessarily been, depending what organization you're in, like I'd love to still see some systemic changes in organizations where we do reward for results versus for visibility, because sometimes
Yeah,
that leads to like what Michelle is saying, is like, well, like you're trying to be your best self at work and you're also trying to be your best self at home. And what does that look like in both world? Like at work, in my mind, like I'd love to see organizations that have more transparency on what does success look like in your role, right? And being disciplined around not only what we say yes to, because it's easy to say yes, but where do we put the lens on, no, we're not doing that. Like if we think about, our goals, our vision, and our mission, I'd love to see organizations that are a little bit more disciplined on what they choose not to do, because it's very easy to take more and more on. And I think that also starts from the leadership down, because if it's not modeled for us in leaders, it's really hard for, depending where you're at in the organization, and individual contributors to feel like that you have that permission.
yeah,
And then at home, what I often remind parents of, it's not about being a perfect parent, right? And I feel like we're in this age where oftentimes we are over parenting, because we feel like, well, I'm at work all day, so now I have to spend all my time with my kids, and my needs don't matter. And I think also normalizing that it's really about the quality time versus the quantity time. And something that I teach parents is like this special time. And for young kids, it's literally 5 to 10 minutes. And so maybe and I remember this was my routine when I was working outside of the home, and I'd come home and my kids were like just wanting me because they hadn't seen me all day. I'd make a habit of, if I was commuting to work, I'd make sure that that walk from, the train station home, I was unplugging from checking my email, that I was really just focusing on tuning into my breath and maybe listening to music that I love, not a podcast, not taking in information. So that when I walked in the door, or if I was driving, I would spend a few minutes in my car before I actually walked through the door, so that I felt like I had more capacity to show up and be excited to see them versus, and also saying, hey guys, I'm excited to see you. I need to go to the washroom and I need to change. And then I'm excited to play with you. But remembering that it doesn't have to be a big amount of time. Like I think as high achievers, we always think we have to do more.
hmm,
And I also want to normalize the idea that sometimes doing less is more.
that's so true, Jen. I really appreciate that. And for me right now, I have a 5-month-old, and so I'm like, okay, I'm with this baby for 2.5 hours. Like, how long does it matter? How long can I actually be present, actively engaging with the baby versus like it's good for him to have some solo time too. It's good for him to have quiet and kind of understanding um, or just appreciating more about like what does it fully take to develop as a human and knowing that there are all these different things and that engagement is important, but it's not necessarily important to be engaged for 2.5 hours. It's important to have those moments where you're engaged and um,
Yeah. And I
yeah.
think part of the reason that we have such an epidemic of ADHD, for example, ADD, is because we're so used to always the stimulation always coming to us. And actually no stimulation and rest is so important. And boredom for our kids is important, because that leads to creativity. That leads to them not always having to, getting all these things of things and stimulation. And so also recognizing that sometimes it's really important to be comfortable in that discomfort of not doing anything, and not doing anything is actually important to have on that to-do list.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Michelle and Joanna, is that helpful? Like, I know there's no, magic bullet to say like, how do we do this? And I think it's figuring out in our own lives what are boundaries that maybe we're struggling to set, that we need to, what are ways, things that we're doing that maybe we shouldn't, what are we outsourcing, what are we keeping? And it's really coming in from that curiosity of, we don't have to do it all. Um, and what is most important to us, what are our values, how do we show up in that way that's meaningful. Learning to say no, I think, is something that as a culture we need to normalize more. It's important to say no to some things. And that criticism, as Joanna mentioned, like that criticism of like, I shouldn't say no, or I should be able to do it all, it's going to show up. It's going to show up just because we've gone a lifetime thinking we should be doing it all, and allowing that voice to be seen, that it's, yeah, I see you and this is how I've always done it, and I'm trying something different right now, and that's okay too, right? That reassurance of, just because it's uncomfortable doesn't mean it's wrong. Like when we're trying to do something different, like maybe deciding to use an EA at Sundays might feel like, oh, I shouldn't do that. And really thinking about, well, what's it going to allow me to do that's more important to me? And not letting that discomfort be wrong, letting that discomfort be a sign of, it's actually growth and learning. And how do I make that okay too? And it's going to look different for everyone. And I think that's the other thing, is that what success looks like for each of us is different.
Yeah, I think, and it also will evolve over time too, Jen. So you like success might look like one thing today or this in this season, and it might look really different in 6 months or in a year. And being open to that is also really powerful.
I love that. Like, yeah, your definition of success could change over time, and that's okay. Yeah. What, for parents listening, and there's a lot who will be listening to this, to the replay, who are maybe feeling maxed out, what's one small shift that they can try maybe this week to feel more in control? What would you advise?
Um, I think one thing, if you are just trying to just feel a small amount of relief on the day to day, is find those few minutes for yourself. So whether that maybe you log off your computer 5 minutes early and you go outside, or you wake up a little bit earlier and exercise, finding that routine of a few seconds for yourself is just really powerful. And then also making sure that you're accountable to yourself for creating those. I actually made myself like a little sticker chart for every day that I did something for myself. And I think acknowledging that you're doing that repeatedly is really helpful. And so, yeah, pushing yourself to find those few minutes. Um, and sticker charts are really powerful. No.
And I love how amazing modeling that is also. And I know your child is young, but like as parents, I often say like modeling is one of the most powerful parenting strategies you can have. So how beautiful is it to have yourself like with this chart and putting stickers on did it, like I took care of myself, I went for a walk, or I exercised, or I read,
Yeah.
or I went to bed early. And like tracking it, I often say these charts are for tracking more than the reward, and the reward in itself is then seeing like I did it and it felt good. So I think that's
Yeah.
also such powerful modeling for children, so that they don't grow up feeling like they have to put themselves last.
Yeah. So that's my biggest tip. Make yourself a sticker chart. Choose one thing that you want to do. Um, And then I think
Mm,
if you have a little bit of extra time, I don't know if you've done this exercise, Jen, but in the buy back your time book, one thing they really recommend is this like time and energy audit. So going through, you can do it, they do it over like a week or two, but you can even
mm,
do it in one day. Just get a piece of paper, look at everything that's on your calendar today and everything that's on your to-do list, and then rank that of like 1 through 4, how important is it? And then if you have highlighters, or you can just do another column, but rank whether that gives you energy or takes away your energy. And I think identifying those things that drain energy for you and figuring out, do you have to do them at all? Can your partner do them, or do you want to outsource them, is such a huge win, because even getting rid of a few things that drain your energy gives you so much more energy back for the things that you enjoy and want to be present for.
Yeah, I have actually my own version of that chart, exactly that. And I don't do it over 2 weeks. I find that is a lot, but really starting to list all the things you do in a day in real time so that you can see it. And then, like you said, ranking it from 1 to 4, as well as, is this lifting my energy or is this depleting? Because the ones that are depleting are the ones you want to say, well, can I stop doing this? Can I outsource it, or can I delegate it to like someone in the
Yeah.
household? I think is a great place to start. Um, if you were to rewrite the story for ambition and parenthood, what would you want it to say instead?
Yeah. We've been talking about this a lot internally, and I think the phrase that we think about is trying to erase the motherhood penalty. And the motherhood penalty is basically the idea that, when moms reach motherhood, a lot of them will either drop out of the workforce, so we have hundreds of thousands of moms dropping out of the workforce, or lose kind of that. You see that moms are losing kind of like a 6% per kid of their future earnings, whereas dads are making more money. So, making it so that moms are being able to stay in the workforce, and that they're not, facing these big penalties for trying to balance family and work, would be our dream for how ambition and parenthood would look.
And that should be a choice, right? To really allow for that to be a choice, because I don't want to take away from some mothers and fathers want to be home with their kids
Yeah.
full time. I personally, I that's not me, and I truly recognize the value that of some mothers or fathers who choose to do that, but let it be a choice, right? Let it be a choice, and let's not penalize those who don't want that, or those who may choose to want that for a period of time. And like you said, in different seasons, change their mind and re-enter. Let's not devalue all of the equity they've built into their careers before and coming back.
Yes, 100%.
Mm.
I agree
Yeah,
with you, Jen.
thank you. I love to, and as you shared in the beginning, like you're in the US, and I feel like the US is one of the countries around the world who has so much growth to do in this area, more than any other country in the world. And I'd love to see more change where mothers don't pay that penalty. Thank you for coming and sharing your experience with us. Thank you for sharing the opportunity of Sundays as a way for people to get support in reducing this mental load. And I want to open it up to any questions, but I first want to thank you for creating this, because I think it's such an option for people to consider to get support in this way that we didn't have before, but we also weren't doing all the things that we are doing today and trying to do today. So it is so neat. I'm going to open it up to questions. Does anyone have anything that they want to ask Ashley or myself? Or one word you want to share on if this was helpful or what you're taking away? For me, it's a reminder, and again, the seasons of revisiting that those all those responsibilities. Like for example, I used to be the one doing all the cooking in the household. When my kids were younger, we had a nanny, and again, I'm normalizing that we had no extended family, so having a nanny was the only way we could manage both our careers. But now my kids are older, and I was taking on all the cooking and the meal planning. And my husband used to say to me, he's like, Jen, you cook angry. And it's just because I I don't like cooking. And it's like this idea of, oh, I'm Italian, I'm a woman. They're like, that you should love this, because my mother's an amazing cook and I'm not. And so I used to cook as a main of source of nourishment. And I share this because my husband and I recently had this discussion around, he actually likes cooking. And it's one of the things I took on just because I thought that I should be doing it. And we actually made a shift where he, for the past couple of months, has been doing all the meals. And my kids are like, Mom, you pumped him up so much before where you talked about how much, because he was cooking on the weekends, how much you loved
Yeah.
his meals and you set him up to kind of take this over. I'm like, maybe I did, but he also is enjoying it. So I think, like you said, when you think about who wants to take this on, instead of assuming that it should be one or the other, like who wants to do this, who takes more joy in it, or who doesn't like it, like who least
Yeah.
painful. Like, so I've taken on some other things that he doesn't like that I don't mind doing. So I think also challenging the things that we do and having those discussions on, can it change, can it shift? And I think an important part is just open communication too.
Yeah, making that space for that discussion is so important too, where you're acknowledging the work that you're doing and the work that he's doing, and then making space to discuss how does that work actually feel for you? And it probably feels like a lot for both of you, but are there ways that you could make it lighter? Um, and I think what you just mentioned of who actually likes doing these things, like
Yeah.
I hate making the bed. I don't know why. I just like hate it for some reason, but my husband doesn't mind it and he loves having new sheets. So he's like, okay, I will be in charge of this thing. And it doesn't feel like a burden for him as much. For me, it's like this thing that weighs on me. And so, and then we can trade. He doesn't like feeding the baby right now, and I like feeding the baby. And so they are kind of these exchanges, but you don't know if you don't make space to talk about it and to acknowledge the work that you're both doing.
Yeah. And, talking about making the bed, I know I used to always tell my kids they had to make their bed, and it was this nagging of making the bed. And for a while they would, and they'd stop and they're like, Mom, why do I have to make the bed? I'm just going to go sleep in it at night. And it's really, again, like I want to give them a sense of autonomy and control, and it doesn't have to be my way. So their room, because it's their room, they can keep in whatever state they want. We do like a regular, like we're going to clean up, but like I'm not
Yeah.
then telling them every morning they have to make their bed. If they choose to, great. If they don't, common spaces, because I have to be in the space too as well as them, those I want to be kept clean, because having tidy and order is important to me, but also letting go of some spaces where it's like that's not my space, so like you can choose to have it however you want. And rather than
Yeah.
sharing care, like outsourcing cleaning, like yeah, sometimes we think we need to do all the things, and hiring and paying for some of these services, notice if that brings you more joy, and like in that value again of like how much does it cost versus what is my time worth, and is this important? So we can't outsource everything, but there's definitely a lot we can, and looking at what are the things that we don't like doing that might be better for all of us if someone else did. So thank you, Ashley. Like I think this conversation and what you're building at Sundays is so needed in this generation that we are leading today, and also allowing for more people to feel like there is support available. Because I know a lot of people who choose not to enter parenthood because they're like it's just too much, and so you're also offering an opportunity for people to realize that there is support out there, and challenging what it looks like, and it can look different for all of us. So thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Jen. I learned a lot from this conversation and I hope other people enjoyed it as well.